Still questions about the presidential preference election in Maricopa County, so we asked the Arizona Secretary of State to join us and see if it needs to be fixed and what they're doing about it. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. Show the people.
All right, the Maricopa County elections made national news. I stood in the long lines with everyone else. So to get the bottom line of what's going on now, we asked the Arizona Secretary of State, Michele Reagan, to join us. Thanks. Got to be a rough time, or at least a busy time for you.
Busy week. It's been a busy week.
So let's start at the beginning of this. When the long lines were happening, were you aware of it while it was happening in Maricopa County? Was your office aware of it?
We were aware of it. And this was a statewide election as Secretary of State, so I had nothing to compare it to. So as the phone calls started coming in, and our phone lines were very, very busy from folks, I kept asking people who had on my staff who'd been there for other elections, is this normal? Is this
right?
Is this compared to other statewide elections? Is are we supposed to be getting hundreds and hundreds of phone calls like this? As I was pulling people to answer phones, that elections isn't their division.
Right.
Keep in mind that Secretary of State's office has a lot of divisions, business services and
right.
libraries and all sorts of. I had a gal who does bookkeeping, and our CPA answering the phones as well. So it was, yes, we were aware of it.
It was interesting.
We sent people out, too.
At first, people were saying, wow, this is great. Look at the huge turnout.
Yes.
And they saw it as almost a positive. But when people were in line for 4 and 5 hours and they found out the reduction in polling places in Maricopa County, it quickly turned to people not being happy, and then the accusations of voter suppression started coming out. Right. And we played a couple of the audio bites from your comments about your office being kind of a clerical part of this, but also saying, why would anybody work so hard to register voters only to stop them from voting? So where do you stand on that because of the town halls, the meetings you're having now? What's the stance of your office on that voter suppression aspect?
Well, just that is that everything that we work for as election officials, going out and registering people to vote, especially reaching into the 18 to 35-year-old demographic, which we were so excited to see so many of those first-time voters. And registering them, we held events with the Phoenix Mercury and Phoenix Suns where we were able to get in front of 4,000 young people and get them excited about voting. You don't do events like that just to then go out and want to deny them an opportunity. We were clearly very disappointed that for so many people their first time voting experience was a fiasco. And we just need to make sure that two things. One, that never happens again to voters. And two, going back to people who that we shouldn't, they now think that that's what voting is like. Well, voting's not supposed to be like that. And so we hope that if that didn't discourage them from ever going to the polls again. So it's very, very troubling, and it's disheartening.
Well, there's a big difference between mistakes that were being made, and in the county recorder's office have admitted mistakes were made in the reduction of numbers. They didn't anticipate that many people showing up, and intentional suppression of votes, which is a small number of people making the accusation. Do you see value in the Justice Department coming and doing an investigation from somebody who has nothing to do with Arizona elections?
Right. Well, first of all, as far as suppression of votes goes, we categorically deny that anyone was trying to suppress anyone's right to vote because it goes against everything that we believe in as election officials. However, we would absolutely welcome and be very welcoming to any third party coming in on the federal level and investigating what happened, because we think that that's only going to serve to help everybody do their job better. We always say that there's nothing to hide from the truth. So the Justice Department has already sent letters of inquiry to the Maricopa County Recorder's Office, and they'll be going through and answering questions. And I don't think that's anything to be afraid of. So,
do you work when this happened? Do you work with them? Does the county recorder's office? Do you work with them, since you oversee elections, with what happened in the fallout? Are there questions from your office?
Oh, absolutely.
There, and finding out what happened to ensure it just doesn't happen again.
We do, and on top of that, not only are we working with Maricopa County, but you need to remember that 15 counties in the state, and for the most part, 14 counties went absolutely wonderfully. So there's also success stories in 14 counties that we're going and finding out what went right in those counties. Each county handles their elections differently. So we also need to go, as we compile all the information, as we do after every election. You know, it's not like this is the only time that we do this. We compile all the information after every election. But what happened in Coconino County, up in Flagstaff, that went great? What kind of, for instance, without getting too much into the weeds, what kind of e-poll books do they use up there? Down in Pima County, what kind of tabulation processes do they have down in Pima County versus Yavapai County? Comparing all those things, because keep in mind again, all 15 counties use different equipment. They all have different ways that they perhaps set up the lines, different ways that they figure out what kind of polling places, or where to put the polling places, how many to have. So we're going to be comparing all that for best practices going forward, so that, you know, counties can share information and see what worked best and what didn't. Okay, so we've got to take a quick break. If you can stick around, I want to ask what happened in Maricopa County, because it was the one that it happened in, to ensure that moving forward, because we have a primary and we have a special election coming up May and a general. And then also to talk with you about the town hall meetings you've been hosting and the feedback you're getting from voters. So if we'll stick around for a few minutes. We'll be back in a few moments with the Secretary of State to find out more about what's happened and moving forward to make sure it's a good experience when you vote. So stick around.
Do you love to win prizes? Pick up a copy of Arizona Player.
Okay, we are talking about the elections, what happened in Maricopa County and statewide in the presidential preference election. Michele Reagan, Secretary of State.
Thank you for calling it the right
Well, it's interesting. Let me ask you about this, because one of the things I noticed, because I spout off on the air and on the radio show, and we had kind of mocked the independent voters that were showing up, and I said, they've been saying all along you can't vote in this election. What were they thinking? Well, I got a web link, and it says you can vote in a primary if you're an independent. Well, this isn't a primary. It's a presidential preference election. I liked the interest, but it had to be disheartening to some. We did the math. 2,500 roughly per polling place in Pima County, almost 21,000 in Maricopa County. A big mistake was made. Has anybody identified yet what caused that? Just not to point fingers, but to show why it happened so it doesn't happen again.
Clearly, and Helen Purcell has said repeatedly, she owns that mistake. She miscalculated very much so in the interest of people that were going to show up at the polls.
Crazy.
To go from 200 down to 60. And then on top of that, the amount of independents that showed up wishing to vote, and clearly there needs to be more information out there given to people for this one election that comes around every 4 years. And you really can't blame the public when here we go around and say, hey, independents, you can vote in primaries. You can vote in primaries in Arizona. Oh, wait, but not this one.
Because it's not a primary.
As it's not a primary. And then we hear people calling it the presidential primary, when in reality it's just what you called it, the presidential preference election. And it's got this crazy name, but that's exactly what it is. And it's not by definition a primary. So it's a hybrid type of election in Arizona. It comes around once every 4 years. It is very confusing. I think we really need to look at in 2020 what we want it to actually be. It certainly shouldn't. Clearly, the way it is now is not working.
Well, it's interesting because the primary is coming in August, and so just to
that's the real primary that everyone votes in.
And just to clear that up,
we want them to vote.
In the Senate race in Arizona, Senator McCain is being challenged in a primary by Kelly Ward, and there's some other people on the ballot, and there are a bunch of congressional districts where there will be multiple people in the same party, so independents can go and pick a party, and they can vote in that primary.
And independents can be so powerful in those races.
Absolutely.
Especially in legislative races where they're so dominant by one party or another, where the race is in the primaries. So whatever candidate gets out of that primary in a legislative race, sometimes they have no general election. So the independents, if you want to have your say, it's in that primary. So we want them to go vote, and it's very, very hard. The presidential preference election is a very hard sell. So yes, we did have many independents show up at the polls in Maricopa County. And we had candidates, too, that were sending out emails statewide saying, independents, go vote in the polls.
Demand a ballot.
And we know that you can't vote, but go anyways and demand your right, and ask for a provisional, knowing that you can't, that it's not going to count, but just to make a statement. And I thought that was a little, well, I thought that was kind of obnoxious on behalf of some of the presidential campaigns.
It's interesting now moving forward, because you're hosting these meetings, and there's going to be one you've added to the list on Monday, correct? In South Phoenix.
Correct. It's not this Monday, it's the following Monday.
Following Monday.
So
okay.
It's, I believe that is the 25th.
Okay. And how is it being received? And when the voters are showing up with their complaints or with their telling you what happened to them, why they weren't able to, the party was changed or was supposed to and wasn't changed, how is it being received? How are you being received by them?
We love hearing directly from the voters. That's exactly where we're getting our best information from, is hearing what happened to them, either when they were in the polls, or a lot of the people, too, are telling us, hey, I've always been on the permanent early ballot list, and guess what? This year I didn't get my early ballot. Or I've never been on the early ballot list, and this year, all of a sudden I received one. So we need to hear those details, because what we're able to do is follow up with those specific voters and then backtrack and see what happened with their specific cases, so we can try to see if there's some sort of pattern in, comparing.
Is it too early to tell
voters.
if you found any patterns, or
we're starting to find some patterns, and this just isn't in Maricopa County, by the way. This is something we're seeing statewide, and it has something completely other to do than with the polling place issue. So this is really good, talking directly to voters. We love doing that. We've had some wonderful discussions with people both in Maryvale, last night at the Church of Beatitudes. Tonight we'll be out in Gilbert, which was another area where we saw really, really long lines. So it's a great opportunity to get out, meet some folks. And then we just added one in South Phoenix.
But it's going to be the special election coming up in May, and then we've got a primary, and then the general, and it's going to be a different experience. People are going to be able to...
There'll be a lot more polling places,
yep,
which is great. We think 116
Good.
polling places for the May 17th election. And you'll be able to go to any polling place in that election. And then in August and November, the real primary, and then the big general election, it'll go back to what's called precinct-based polling, yep, where you go to your specific polling place, and then there's a lot more than the in Maricopa County than the 116. That's where it doubles even a lot more than that.
Well, I know that it's a very busy time for you. We appreciate the explanation.
No, we love elections, so we'll talk about it anytime.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back. Don't go away.
Remember her on Mother's Day. Emerald's the main